Hello everyone, my name is Matt and I'm a waffler. According to the dictionary definition, that means that I like to talk at length in a vague and trivial manner, which I appreciate doesn't sound all that positive, especially if you paid £35 for the privilege. But my mission today is to try and convince you that actually the world needs more waffle. And that's because more waffle means less loneliness. Loneliness is, in many ways, a very, very complicated thing. It's very difficult to predict. It affects all sorts of people at all sorts of stages of life. And it's shrouded in this stigma, which makes it very hard to penetrate. But at the heart of the loneliness problem, there's actually quite a simple formula. Loneliness is defined as a lack of desired relationship. And every relationship starts with a conversation, often a vague and trivial one. So, whilst we're tackling this complex beast of loneliness, there stands a simple truth. That one of the most powerful things we can do is to give somebody the opportunity to talk. And so, we've reworked the definition of a waffler to be somebody that gives somebody else permission to talk at length in a vague and trivial manner. My mum was to me, and will always be, the original waffler. She had this way of talking to people with genuine love and curiosity, no matter who they were. You might know some people like this, but with my mum, a trip into town was never straightforward. She saw people as subjects, not objects to be manoeuvred around with the least amount of disturbance to her day. Everyone was a potential conversation. And not because she needed it, but because she believed in the simple kindness of noticing something. When she died a couple of years ago, it brought loneliness right to the heart of my family, especially for my dad. And I remember talking to my dad as the loneliness had started to settle in. And I remember him describing, for him, the loneliest time of day as being when he got home from work, closed the door behind him, and realised that there was no one to share the frustrations of the day with. No one to compare the rising price of fig rolls with. No one to waffle with. And that's something we see time and time again in our community work. People are dying for an opportunity to waffle. And the tragic reality is, people are dying precisely because they do not have that opportunity. And that may sound dramatic, but actually the links between loneliness and life expectancy are well established. There's tons of research into this, but experts reckon that loneliness increases your risk of death by about 26%. Making it more dangerous to you than smoking 15 cigarettes a day or obesity. And there are tons of shocking statistics around loneliness. But I think when we consider the barriers in our society that stop us from having those conversations that lie at the heart of forming new relationships, whilst we might find those statistics shocking, I'm not sure we can really find them surprising. I mean, think about it. None of us have any time for a start, right? And even if we do find some time, then we have to find a human. And loads of those have disappeared. They've been beamed up from supermarkets and surgeries. We've lost a lot of our community spaces, which had a whole load of humans in, different kinds of humans. And just simply more and more of us live alone. But let's just say you find the time and you find a human. Well, then there's all this within-reach technology now, which has been designed to make an economy out of our attention. Meaning it's very difficult to be fully present, and very easy to avoid and ignore people. But let's just imagine you found the time and you found a human who's not plugged into tech. If we're honest, many of us have just lost the art of conversation. And certainly the enthusiasm and the courage needed to talk to strangers. Something which is increasingly seen as countercultural, if not downright dangerous. I'm not sure it's any wonder that loneliness is growing when the conditions for it to grow in are so perfect. And I'm genuinely convinced, I really am, that it has never been harder to have a face-to-face conversation with a human in the whole of human history. So what do we do? Well, I'm going to tell you what we did, and I'm going to give you a couple of ideas for what you might be able to do as well. So we went with a slightly left field notion of starting up a not-for-profit waffle house, as you did. And it won't surprise you to learn that it all started around a conversation. Specifically, a conversation around a kitchen table in Upline. A friend of mine just happened to mention that she'd always wanted to set up a dessert place, and that her Belgian family happened to make the very best Belgian waffles in the world ever. she didn't know this, but a couple of months previously, I had a dream. And for the first time in my life, I woke up, my heart was racing, I knew I just had to write down every detail. And I did. And in the dream, I was setting up a community cafe with some friends. And so, somewhere between that dream and that conversation, the idea for Waffle was born. And then a couple of weeks later, I'm walking with a friend who tells me that he's been made redundant. And in retrospect, I probably too quickly tell him that this is brilliant, because now he gets to be a full-time waffler. But that is how Sophie, Tim and I left our jobs, and with no money and very little experience, decided to set up a community waffle house to tackle loneliness. But first we needed a place. And about that same time, the old RSPCA charity shop in Axminster came onto the market, and we didn't have any money, but we thought, well, hey, let's just go around it. And we did, and then we met the landlord who offered us use of the space free of charge until we started trading. Okay, well, that's a start. And then we set up a crowdfunder, which was brilliant, not just because it gave us the opportunity to raise some much needed funds, but it also, more importantly, allowed us to communicate our vision with our community. And the way that we set up our crowdfunder campaign meant that if we didn't reach the target amount by the deadline, we wouldn't get any of the money. And I remember going into the last day of our crowdfunder campaign, and we were still £1,000 short of our £10,000 target. And I really vividly remember being in the car with my family thinking, what are we going to do? And getting a phone call from Sophie. And she does this thing when she gets excited, she goes really high pitched, you can't understand it. But I managed to just about work out that an anonymous donor had given us £1,000 to take us over our total. And we thought, wow, okay, maybe this crazy waffle thing could actually happen. And it did. On April the 11th, 2019, we opened the doors to the public for the first time. And within 4 hours, we'd sold out of every single waffle. We'd broken our coffee machine, our dishwasher, and I think most of our staff. But we had an answer to one question, that people wanted waffles. But we knew that was only half the battle. Could we use our waffle house as a base to tackle loneliness? Because of this stigma around loneliness, we knew we had to be clever. We couldn't just put a sign above the door saying, lonely people, welcome here. We had a real heart for those in our community that were battling loneliness but didn't have the courage or the means to ask for help. And so we went undercover. And with the help of the National Lottery, we set up a community program to tackle loneliness covertly. And what that means is we take ordinary people in ordinary situations and we train and inspire them to have adventurous conversations. And then we try and orchestrate as many opportunities as we can for those conversations to take place. So we start in the Waffle House with our team of staff, volunteers and work experience. And we train them how to make the most of the natural opportunities for conversation that there are in a cafe, to make sure that people are seen and heard. And then we work with the community. We try and host as many groups as we can think of to try and bring people together, anything from knitting to Dungeons and Dragons. And then we go a little bit further and we work with all the local primary schools. And we give them an opportunity to come in. And we teach them about the importance of conversations. They're my favourite part. We give them the opportunity to practice having conversations with our customers. And then we go out a little further again. And we try and reach those that are most isolated in our community by offering a community outreach programme to help them with anything from fixing an iPad to a garden fence. All just to make possible some waffling. And that simple formula runs through everything we do. More waffle equals less loneliness. And that's developed into a mission statement for us to tackle loneliness, one adventurous conversation at a time. And it really is one conversation at a time. That's something we've learned. When it comes to loneliness, there are very few shortcuts. You can't throw money at it to make it go away. There aren't many neat and practical solutions. You're dealing with real people, and it gets messy. They take time and attention. And taking things one conversation at a time can often feel like it's slow going. But actually what we've learned is the potential ripple effects are amazing. I think probably one of the best examples of this I can think of is a lady called Karen. Karen joined us through our social prescribing wellbeing group a couple of years ago. She's a full-time living carer, which means she doesn't get much chance to get out and to socialise. But after a couple of conversations with Karen, we realised we were dealing with a lady who had this brilliant personality and a razor-sharp wit. And over a couple of years, she's grown hugely in confidence. she's actually helped to set up a social group for ladies in Axminster, which has over 100 members. And I was in town the other day, and I was chatting to these two ladies, and I got around to asking them how they knew each other. And they said they both arrived in Axminster at the same time and didn't know anyone. And so went on to this social group in Waffling. And then they met each other, and they now hang out a couple of times a week and go on trips together. And I thought, yes, they've done something actually incredibly difficult as adults. They've made a friend. And that's not easy to do. So Karen's a brilliant example of that. We can only have so many conversations at Waffle. If we're going to tackle loneliness on a society level, we need a whole shift in the culture towards conversations, which means we need you. And one of the things I love about all of this is that anyone can do it. You don't need expertise. You don't need a certain personality type. You just need a little sense of adventure. And I'm hoping just in these last couple of minutes to inject a little sense of adventure into your own conversations by looking at a couple of areas of conversation. Striking up and listening up. So, striking up. Here's my big idea. Start small and embrace the risk. So, you may have heard of a campaign that the Samaritans run called Small Talk Saves Lives. It's based around this piece of evidence that says that just simply acknowledging someone with a few words can be enough to break cycles of suicidal thought, which is an incredible thing in itself. But what that tells us about striking up conversations is it doesn't have to be complicated. A smile, a hi, a comment on the weather. When we do that, we're doing something incredibly important. We're taking a risk. And that is so important. A lot of people, when they come to our training, I think they're hoping that we'll take the risk away from striking up conversations. We tell them we can't do that, and even if we could, we wouldn't. And that's because sacrifice is an integral part of love. And what we're doing when we overcome that little bit of fear in striking up a conversation, we're communicating to that other person, you are worth the risk. It's something that really struck me about my mum. Every conversation cost her. Not just in time. As a naturally shy person, it cost her a bit in courage as well. But with every conversation, the message she sent out was clear. You are worth the price. So, start small, embrace the risk. Next, listen up. There is very little point in striking up a conversation if you're not going to listen. In fact, we can do more harm than good if we communicate to someone you are worth stopping for, but you're not worth listening to. And yet, it is eye-opening just how rare good listening is in day-to-day life. In fact, I'd go so far to say it's kind of almost become a radical thing to do in today's society. And there are tons of ideas that I could share about better listening, but I just want us to maybe think about one today. And it might sound a little bit cheesy. I encourage you to resist the itch to switch. So, I don't know if you've noticed that when we're in conversations and someone else is talking, we can spend a lot of that time when they're talking preparing what we're going to say next. And then when someone does finish talking, assuming we can wait that long, we kind of hop in with what we prepared to say, switching the focus often onto ourselves. This is called a switch response. And if that forms the majority of what we do in conversations, we're setting up this kind of verbal ping pong, which works well at a banter level, but at a relationship level is actually quite dehumanizing. Because what we're doing is we're treating people as an audience for our thoughts and ideas. What we want to do instead is ask one more question about whatever the other person just said. So, just to give you a hypothetical scenario, someone finishes up talking about Arsenal Football Club. You've got a couple of options. You can either switch the focus to talk about a decent football club, the usual, or you can ask one more question and maybe find out if there are other members of their family that suffer from a similar illness. It's really simple. It's really simple. But it's so effective. It really has completely, that one idea alone has completely changed the way I have conversations. Because it's kind of forced me into the discipline of being interested in people, which has over time become more of a natural instinct. So there you have it. Strike up courageously, listen up radically. It's not rocket science. But remember, that's the point, and that's the power of it. Conversations are, in one sense, just the most ordinary of things, which means that ordinary people can do them, and they can reach ordinary people, which is so important because loneliness affects ordinary people like you and I. But whilst they are ordinary in one sense, they can have extraordinary results. I'm here today because of a conversation around a kitchen table. And this is the thought I'd like to leave you with. The people that need the power of conversation the most are often those with the least power to start one up, which is why I'm proud to be a waffler. Thank you.